Welcome back to another episode of Legends of Runeterra in-depth analysis, this time featuring another friend of mine, Pespscola, who is playing against Blazing Asian, which is another tournament player who plays a lot of tournaments. And this is going to be featuring a matchup between Field of Rush, Trundle versus the old Gohard when Gohard was 1 mana. And so in this position, of course, you mulligan all 4 cards away. And the thing about this deck is that its cards are very long-term committal, because you can only pretty much play 1 card per turn, and you're going to need to plan ahead, because if you make one decision, it's going to severely lock in your future decisions, since your mana pool is so inflexible. So of course we're gonna just speed through the first few turns. Turn 3, of course, Avros and Trapper, the only playable card. Of course. So our opponent plays 1 Gohard, and now they attack. We block the Elise, obviously. And then, again, the only playable card in our hand right now is Avalanche, and there's no real reason to play, so of course we pass unless they develop enough for us to justify doing it, so we give them the opportunity to play their units. Fortunately for us, they happen to just play a 2 health unit that is also very worth killing, so of course we play Avalanche. Now on turn 5, Pepsi actually considers playing Trundle for a moment and then passes. Now his reasoning behind it was that he doesn't actually want to play A-Bomb, because our opponent would be able to kill our Trundle with just a Gohard after A-Bomb, and you don't want that because you want to attack with it when you have 8 mana and level up your Trundle, and then do a lot of overwhelm damage. So you don't want your opponent to be able to trade just an A-Bomb and a Gohard in order to kill the Trundle. However, the problem is that he also said that he wanted to hold up mana for Catalyst or Avalanche if those became options. But again, as I mentioned before, the problem is that he can only play 1 card per turn. So at some point, if our opponent plays multiple cards, he's going to have to react with his card anyway, and then he's going to not have any other cards he can play that turn. So the thing is, let's say our opponent plays so he said he was okay with our opponent passing and open attacking for 4 face damage. However, the problem is that our opponent has more than 2 options. The 2 options we listed were either our opponent goes wide and we play Avalanche, or 2, our opponent doesn't go wide and open attacks. But the problem is he doesn't have to do those things. If, for example, he plays a 2-drop here, we would end up playing Trundle anyway, so no upside there. If our opponent tries to pass and instead of open attacking, they develop their units, we're going to have to react with either Trundle or Avalanche anyway, and then they can keep developing units because their creatures are so cheap, they can just play 3 or even 4 units with 6 mana easily. So the thing is, at some point, we're going to have to Avalanche, and he's not going to have to spend all of his development before that. So at the end of the day, what he's doing here is he's basically giving our opponent the opportunity to take away 5 of our mana, which we desperately need because we can only play 1 card per turn. And our opponent doesn't take that option because our opponent assumes that we don't have Trundle, for obvious reasons, because we would have played it. So we end up playing the Trundle anyway, of course, no big deal. But for good practice, you should just slam the Trundle. No need to get fancy. So of course we play the Yeti because it leaves open our option to play Catalyst. Now it's very important to for example give us mana to play Catalyst this turn and not just develop Alpha Wildclaw, because the thing is that next turn we will have 7 mana, and if we don't play Catalyst. And if we develop Wildclaw already, we have nothing to do with that 7 mana. Alternatively, if we get to ramp this turn, then we're going to have 8 mana. And with 8 mana, we can do so many more things. We can level up our Trundle and also play Tryn. That is simply an option you have to take, so of course he plays Yeti. Alternatively, instead of playing Yeti, he could have played Catalyst right away into maybe Avalanche, but again, playing Yeti is much safer. You keep the spell mana anyway, we're not in a rush to Avalanche. You take this block, again, for the same reason as mentioned before, you don't want to give our opponent the opportunity to play Gohard. And also, we commit to Catalyst there, because even if we did play Avalanche, not only would we lose all the benefits of playing Catalyst that we mentioned before, but also we would only block really 1 damage, because, well, 3 damage, I guess, but because our opponent doesn't really have good attacks. He has the Yeti that trades into, he has the 4/3 that trades into our Yeti, and we kill the Zap. But aside from that, we can block the 2/2, and he connects with a 1/1. So it's really just 3 damage at most. But we kill his 2/2 for free if we were to go with that scenario again. Sorry, I'm just gonna go back a couple seconds. So in this position, our opponent plays 1 sec. Wait, didn't they salvage? Okay, so our opponent plays salvage, and it tosses away pack your bags and cursed keeper. I just wanted to double check that. So now we go with our plan. We play Ice Pillar, level up our Trundle, play Tryndamere, and now we can get plenty of overwhelm damage. So here, their Zap Sprayfin has vulnerable, so we have to decide what to pull it with. In this current scenario, it doesn't actually matter what we pull it with because all of their units have 2 attack at most, but now they play Bubblefish, which means that we have to pull the Zap Sprayfin with our Tryndamere because that way we don't want our Tryndamere to go to 1 HP so that they can trigger Tryndamere's level up condition with just a Go Hard. Or, well, actually, their Go Hards are evolved into packs, but they could play TF Red card. I don't know if they have any other deal 1 damage effects, but overall, you don't really want, you want to make it easier for your opponent to. You don't want to make it easier for your opponent to level up your Tryndamere. And also, our Trundle has 6 regenerate health and our opponent has 2 mana, which means that unless they pack our bags, then no matter how they block Trundle, Trundle will heal up all damage taken. So you do want to make sure that you attack with Tryndamere here. Or you challenge the Zap Sprayfin with Tryndamere and not give them the option. So our opponent plays pack your bags for 1 mana, which kills our kills our Trundle and levels up our Tryndamere. Of course, it's good by opponent because first of all, it might not kill the Trundle later, and also, more importantly, because we're not a deck that plays multiple units. So it just sets up more damage for him, sets up a great open attack. Our opponent. And also, he plays a second Bubblefish, which threatens 6 elusive damage for 1 mana total, pretty much. So in this position, we actually have the Vengeance, because the probability that our opponent can deal 3 Nexus damage in a deck with Ledros, Twisted Fate, and also multiple Doom Beasts is simply far too high. So we don't want to take this extra 3 damage if we can avoid it. And also, if we do play Wildclaw or Ledros, after tanking the damage, the probability that our opponent will be able to survive will be quite high, and our opponent has drawn most of their deck, so it's just really likely that they'll have multiple Doom Beasts even. So that's the second Go Hard after the first pack your bags, so there are 2 away from the second pack. And now next turn is the most critical turn, and actually what made me show this game. So we actually top deck Whale, which gives us 2 options. It gives us the option to either play Ledros plus Avalanche or Alpha Wildclaw plus Whale. And he goes for Ledros plus Avalanche because the idea is that our opponent runs 1 Vengeance, 1 Ruination, 1 Grasp, and 1 Whale. Actually, when he was showing me the game, he said that our opponent tossed Ruination from salvage, but after watching the game, I couldn't see that happen, so we're gonna assume that our opponent has the Ruination, but also we're gonna analyze in terms of assuming that they don't, because we're trying to get in the mind of the player and how you should think if you were in his position. And so if we are going to think as if they don't have Ruination, then that will also affect our decision. But most importantly, it's not actually that important. So if we were to play Alpha Wildclaw, first of all, our units have Overwhelm, which means we can attack right away. We don't need to worry about clearing their blockers before attacking. And second, while Vengeance does keep them alive, Vengeance is not a strong play for them, because then they're spending 7 mana to deal with our 6-drop, giving us the option to play more cards. We don't lose our board, and our opponent does not develop anything threatening right away. Alternatively, if we were to play Ledros, we would still need to play Avalanche for our Ledros to even threaten attacking. So what that means is we have to pre-commit all 13 of our mana before we can even attack in a way that doesn't even need our opponent to develop. So first of all, as I said, right now we are already committing 13 mana, and also we are tanking all spell mana, which means next turn we are almost certain to only be able to play one card. And again, it limits our options. If we play the Avalanche now, we don't have the option to play Avalanche defensively, giving our opponent very high odds of being able to push lethal in a way that we can't react unless we, for example, play Ruination, assuming that they develop wide enough before. But again, even if we play Ruination, they can just keep playing units, because after they play 2 or 3 units, we're already going to have the Ruination, simply because we have no units. If that makes sense. So, as you can imagine, for example, if we were to play Wildclaw, it's true that they would survive if they played Vengeance, but we would not be dead automatically. However, so Ledrill's Avalanche is actually quite hard for our opponent to survive, but they could just play Vengeance plus Doombeast, and it wouldn't matter. And if they had Vengeance, what they could do is put it on the stack of Avalanche, so that they can play Doombeast with Nightfall before we attack. Or they could just play Gold card plus... So the idea is that our opponent has to have Vengeance pretty much, or it's pretty much impossible for them to survive, or it seemed impossible for them to survive, but they actually had their one Whale and one Grasp. But alternatively, if we're Alpha Wildclaw and is also a play where they have to have Vengeance anyway, so it's not actually a big deal to say that we are playing around almost everything but Vengeance. So in this critical decision actually does cost them the game. So for example, now we use up our Avalanche on units that could have died to Whale. We use up our spell mana in a position where we could have had 2 spell mana and had the option to play 2 cards next turn. We develop a Ledros simply because, I mean, it has the summon effect, but that's not even that important, because it's either they survive or they don't. And if they survive, we lose. But if we were to play Wildclaw, if they survive, we don't lose. So if, for example, let's say we played Alpha Wildclaw and they still managed to survive this turn. The key here is that we would still probably have 2 or 3 units, and they would essentially have to have their second pack your bags to actually win. So as you can see here, now our opponent goes wide, which is something this deck cannot handle. And then, well, Pepsi has no options. He is not in control of his fate, because his deck can only play 1 card per turn, and he locked himself into these options right now, which is very few. And at some point of our opponent's development, we're going to have to play the Whale, and then we're going to have no options left. Just like right now. So now, as we watch his final moments, I will take this moment to say that most of my games will be recorded from the Madmen, which is the group I've been working with. They play a ton of tourneys, so they have a lot of games, and they suggest me ones they think that were the most interesting that they've played, and I go over them and see if there's any analysis value for me to share. I thought that this was very educational on how you should plan out your turns, and also play around the fact that the options you have right now are going to account for most of the options you're going to have in 2 or 3 turns, and you should plan for that, especially in this case where it's more exemplified simply because of the fact that it can only play 1 card per turn, 2 max. And when it can play 2 cards, you're going to have to set it up a turn in advance. If you've made it this far, thank you for watching. We'll be back with some more analyses. This one was shorter simply because the game was shorter and there was less critical turns. But I think that it was interesting nonetheless, and see you guys next time.